Hi, my name is Wilcox. I was born in Minneapolis in 1938, and this is my story. Well, I had just moved to Madison, Wisconsin from Minneapolis as the director of admissions at the university, and I was 30 years old. I weighed 200 pounds. I had just quit a 15-year smoking habit. And I wasn't thinking about running. I had never thought about running, to tell you the truth. I was an athlete, but not a track person. But one day I saw an ad for a faculty fitness program that encouraged faculty and staff to get more exercise. So I looked into it, and it turned out that they utilized the University of Wisconsin indoor track, an 8-lap to the mile dirt track that operated year-round. So I went over to the track, and I decided I would try to run 1 mile, without stopping, that is. And so I got on my tennis shoes. I had no idea about running shoes at that point. And I set off with the watch on to keep my time. And I managed to run those 8 laps without stopping in about 9 minutes. I wasn't totally out of breath. I mean, I did it fine. I didn't try to speed up or anything. So that was my first running experience, and it all grew from there. That year, I worked up to be able to bring that 9-minute time down to 8, later in the year to 7, and finally, toward the end of that first year, I could do a 6-minute mile, which was kind of a big deal in my mind. It's got a magic sound to it. So from there on, I met some people on the track naturally, and we began to run together. Some of them were serious runners and trying to get ready for a race. Some of them were just exercising. I was doing both, I guess. And I decided how I would progress was to increase the number of miles I could run at 6 minutes per mile. So I had to get to 1 first. A few months later, I got to 2. I ran 2 miles in 12 minutes. Then to 3, then to 4, then to 5. And after 5, which was a half an hour, the next big juncture was a 30-kilometer, 18.6-mile race in the Chicago area that I went down to by myself to see what would happen. And I managed to run the entire race at under 6 minutes, to my surprise. So I had gone from 5 miles to 19 miles at that pace. So I was gaining confidence all the time, and I was entering smaller races around Madison, a 2-miler, a 5-miler, that sort of thing. I was beginning to place in my age group, because I was in the 30 to 34 group, later the 35 to 39, and later the 40 plus. So I was getting some feedback, some reinforcement. I was losing weight. My gosh, I got down to 160. I had long forgotten the smoking problem, and I just kept going. So the race that most people think about as they begin training and running is the marathon. It's got a ring to it. It's just a magical race, 26.2 miles. And I had never thought I would ever run a marathon, but I began to think about it, check on marathons in the area. And the first one, when I had enough confidence to be serious about it, was in Naperville, Illinois, a Chicago suburb. And I went down, I think it was November. This is probably a year and a half after I started running. I had trained for it with increasing mileage, weekly mileage, which was 30 and then 40 and then 50, finally 70 per week. And I did a 24-mile run with a couple of other guys that were serious about marathoning. And I did that without stopping, and I felt confident I could, get to 26.2 if I could do 24 for fun. So I went down to Naperville that Saturday, and the race was a 2-lap race that started at their field house. There's a college there, North Central College, and started at the field house, came back after 13 miles, went out again and came back at the end. I was running pretty fast, faster than I ran 10 miles, the first 10 miles in 64 minutes. I had never done that in training before. So I kept surprising myself. I came back at the midpoint, and one of the problems of runners is they sometimes have to go to the bathroom, and I had to go to the bathroom. So I went into the field house, raced into the bathroom, raced out of the bathroom, resumed my race efforts for the second half, and finished that marathon in 2:58, breaking 3 hours, which is a big deal for recreational runners. And I shocked myself. I don't think I got any awards or anything, but I broke 3 hours. So that set me off on the marathon track. And all the training that I did for the next 20 years was targeted toward improving my marathon time, or hanging on to it as I got into my 40s. You can't hang on to it forever. So I think of myself as a marathoner. When I was at RPI later, I was a VP, so I reported to the president, who was a recreational runner, but a modest one. He never really raced or anything. But I wrote several articles for the local running magazine, and in it I said, I think of myself as a marathoner, and in parentheses I said, unless George Lowe, the president, reads this, I think of myself as a university administrator. He loved it. So back to marathoning. So I worked on getting my time down. I broke 2:50 eventually. I broke 2:40 eventually. And I just kept getting better from 30 or 31 to 41. My times kept getting better at every distance, from the mile to the marathon. I never did anything shorter than a mile. I was too slow twitch a guy. I could run, I might have been able to run a quarter in 65 or 66 seconds. I could run a half at the same pace. I could run a mile almost at the same pace. So I did not have the right kind of muscle twitches. But I kept getting better, kept surprising myself. I won a couple races at age 38. I won a marathon, a local marathon, where my training partner and I, who was my same age, finished together holding hands, won the race. It was great. I ran a 50K, 30-point-something miles in Toledo, and I won that. I ran with a Canadian most of the way, and I had to decide at the end whether to finish with him or beat him. I decided, because he kept slowing down, I didn't want to slow down, I wanted to keep my pace. But I held hands with him and we finished together, we won the race. My best marathon time was in Detroit, 2:31, which is for those interested in numbers, 5:45 per mile pace for the 26 miles. So I kept 2:30 in my head, as a magic time. It used to be the Olympic qualifying time for Americans back in the 60s, but it was no longer the time. But it was a nice round number, and I kept hoping I could one day break 2:30. As my running career progressed, I began to get involved in other aspects of running, like race coordination. I joined the local club and became the race director for the Mohawk Hudson River Marathon, which traversed a trail along these two rivers, the Mohawk and the Hudson in New York. I volunteered to be a timer or a start person or whatever in many other races. I got very involved in running administration. I started a women's cross-country team at the college I was working at, RPI in Troy. And you couldn't begin as a varsity team, you had to begin as a club team before the NCAA would recognize that you were good enough to become a varsity team. So we were a club, but most people didn't know the difference, and other spectators and other coaches, so we managed to finish 13th my last year with the team in the Northeastern NCAA championship, so we were pretty valid. I stopped coaching that team after 5 years, and we hired a real coach who came in and handled it as a varsity team. So that was a success story in getting women students involved in running and racing. When I was 40, I was speaking with an undergraduate at the college who somehow, I don't know, it was his brother worked for Nike. And he heard a little bit about my exploits, and he checked with his brother, who happened to be familiar with their masters team. Nike, of course, had always sponsored open runners, world-class runners. Sponsor means you get a lot of equipment for nothing, you get special accommodations at races, etc. And Nike had started a masters team, and somehow my record as a 39 and 40-year-old was good enough that they invited me to become a member of their team. We didn't train together, we were all over the country, but we got Nike equipment to wear at races, outer garments, shoes, you name it. We got a special room at the Boston Marathon in Boston. We were driven to the starting line because that's a very crowded marathon. So I had little benefits from it, but mainly just the notoriety of being able to say I was sponsored by Nike, ooh, ooh. So that was fun for a while. 3 years later, I kind of dropped off. If I was to summarize my running career, it would be that I avoided injury all these years in spite of my tens of thousands of miles on the road. I think that was just luck in the sense that I have a very good foot plant. Most runners who are injured, and almost all of them are at one point or another, they have a foot plant that sends stress up their legs in a certain way and causes plantar fasciitis or hamstring injuries, or you name it. I managed to have a good heel-to-toe foot plant, so my shoe wear was where shoe manufacturers want it to be. And so I didn't have to face an injury, which is a good thing. My times, I was thinking of the marathon all the time, but I also ran other races. My best track race, well, there were two. I won the national championship 2-mile at the University of Michigan track when I was 40. I ran a mile during the Big Ten track and field championships for masters runners at 4:38. By today's standards, that's nothing, but at that time it was pretty good. I won the North American Masters Marathon Championship in Winnipeg when I was 40. That was an interesting race because I didn't know anybody in this race. It was filled with Canadians, none of whom I knew. And I thought I was either first or second, but a guy went by me toward the end who looked to be 40. I didn't know until I finished and saw him walking around, cooling down, how old he was. So I asked him. He said he was 39, so I could breathe a sigh of relief. I won the 40 and over championship. I've had some miserable races, though. Not so much bad times, but difficult courses, terrains. In the summer that I was 40 or 41, I came across the Escarpment Trail 30K, 18.6 miles. The Escarpment Trail was in the Catskill Mountains in lower upstate New York. And in those days, I could run 30K on the roads in an hour and 48 minutes. So I went with my wife, and we got to the starting area, and I saw these guys. Trail runners are different than road runners. I mean, they're just different. They're shaggier. They got older clothes. They had gloves on, cotton gloves. I said, why are you wearing gloves? To slow yourself down on the trees as you go downhill. A concept I'd never imagined before. So I didn't have gloves with me. It was July, but I realized during the race why they were important. It took me 4.5 hours to run this race. I'd fallen several times. You know, it got so steep that you had to push the person in front of you up the hill to get the next rock. So it was a grueling race. I never did another one in my entire career, but it was an experience that I can't forget. I did a lot of running internationally because international travel was a part of my job. And I've run some interesting places and cities, Singapore, Cairo, Rome, you name it. But no races. Funny, one year I was going to Cairo for 6 weeks to write a book about Egyptian education. And the day before I arrived, the Cairo Marathon had been held, and the winner ran 2:51. The previous week, I had run a 2:48 in Albany, New York. So I wish I'd known about this in time to compete in it. So got interesting stories along the way. As an example of my international experience, I was at a conference in Jakarta, Indonesia, and we stayed in a hotel. Naturally, I went out running every time I could. One day I went out, actually it was the first day I was there, come to think of it, and across from the hotel was a big square grassy field with a fence around it. In the middle of the field were a group of guys, young guys, running in the inside of the fence with some guys with clipboards in the middle of the field. I had no idea what was going on, but I was curious, so I went out to the guys in the middle that were obviously in charge of this event. I use the event word loosely. And I knew no Bahasa Indonesian. They knew little or no English. So we had trouble communicating, but eventually they figured out what I was asking. And the answer was in a one-word answer, Cooper. Cooper. I knew what it was then because Dr. Kenneth Cooper had recently written a book where he had charts where you could get so many points by running so far, so fast, and you could accumulate these points. It was all in the interest of becoming aerobically stronger. So because they were planning their military recruits running around this book, the word Cooper sunk in with me, and I realized that they were doing a 12-minute run. How far could you run in 12 minutes? The group had just finished, the first group. There were lots of guys there. I said, can I join them next? They said yes. So I ran with this group, started in the back, kept picking off one after another, running around the field. And at the end, I had to decide whether I was going to be diplomatic or competitive. I decided I would be a diplomatic, and I finished just behind the winner. Then I said, can I go again? They couldn't believe that I wanted to do this torture again, but they allowed me to run. I ran a second time, again finished with the lead guy, and there was one more group. Can I go again? I go, sure. So I did. This time, however, coming back to the bathroom again, I had to go to the bathroom toward the end of the 12 minutes. My hotel is right across the street. I wanted to stay and chat with these guys about our experience, but I had to hightail it back to my room for that reason. So they're probably still wondering who that guy was, and that's my story. Every chance I got to run with others, I would take it. And I would go out of my way to run with others. I mean, running by yourself is fine. The runner's high, the endorphin rush, it happens because your body demands that, but it's much more fun. I'd like to run at a pace that you could talk. And so I chose to run with other people every chance I could, and at a pace where you could converse. Not that you did. You could run for 30 or 40 or 50 minutes without talking if you wanted to, and if it felt right, you did. But conversational running is the best way. Went to Boston one year with two other guys. We had depleted on the Friday before Boston. Boston is on a Monday. We went to one of the guys' house for a loading dinner. They had prepared a spaghetti dinner. He had a scale at the front step for us to weigh ourselves as we went in. And at the end of the evening, after a lot of carbs and a lot of beer, we got back on the scale. The three of us gained 25 pounds across the three during that one loading meal. So you can take it to extremes. I shouldn't have done that. We were too extreme, but that was back in the day before science really took over. I ran that race and I was 110th overall. I wasn't the first 40 over runner, but I was in the top 5. And that was the day that it was 96 degrees in Boston, the hottest Boston ever. It's still the hottest Boston ever. I ran at all times. If I had to get up at 6 to get a run in, I would do it. If I couldn't do it until 8:30 at night, I did it in the dark. So whatever it took. There were races where they would bring in a national class runner, an Olympian, whose job it would be to start X minutes after the group started, after the race started, and their job was to catch everybody. So I raced against Barry Brown, Hal Higdon, famous runners at the time, and I tried to keep them behind me all the way. I never won one of those races. They always caught up. But it was an interesting way to set up a race, to handicap people like that. I had 2 or 3, but mainly I was addicted to literature about running. I, of course, subscribed to the running magazines, Runner's World, etc. And every book that came out about distance running, I bought it, swallowed it whole, and learned that way. Well, patience, no doubt about that. You cannot start off like a bat out of hell. You have to start off at the pace you know you can handle for 20 plus miles. I never ran a race that I didn't look back on favorably for one reason or another. Probably the Chicago Marathon. It was one I ran several times. I won the over 40 division of the Chicago Marathon. Anyway, I won the Masters part of the Chicago Marathon. I ran 2:32 on a very, very hot day. In fact, we all wore black armbands to protest the start time. The start time was 10:30. It should have been 8:30 or 7:30, but the corporate sponsor of this race that year wanted a media spectacle, so they started it later. We protested mildly with the armbands. Anyway, I won. That was my favorite race because of my performance. Think about running and cross country as a sport to get into, to start with. And of course, once they start, the main thing is to go easy, take it very easy. Injuries are a problem, overdoing it is a problem. You need to get better very, very gradually, and young people don't understand that concept very well. They want to go charging out, conceptually at least. So my advice would be, take it easy, take it easy.